Happy Halloween! This week on Friday Night Arcade, I'm going to take a look at some of the scariest games ever released on the Nintendo Entertainment System. First up is Friday the 13th, released by LJN in 1988. This game mostly follows events from the familiar slasher films of the same name. Even the box art is scary. There's that homicidal, axe-murdering maniac Jason Voorhees right on the cover. I wasn't allowed to watch these movies as a kid, but I knew who he was, and it was unnerving seeing him on the cover of an NES game. You take control of camp counselors and have to defend the Crystal Lake campers against Jason Voorhees. Whether or not this game is actually good is certainly open for debate, but I have to applaud the designer's efforts for trying something different. The game is definitely unique, and I distinctly remember having a certain sense of dread playing it as a rental when I was a little kid. Most of the game takes place as a side-scroller complete with creepy scenery, zombies, and other random monsters. However, occasionally an alarm will go off letting you know that Jason is attacking children in one of the cabins. You have to make a beeline across the map before the timer runs out. If the timer runs out, Jason flat out murders a kid. How ominous is that? Once inside the cabin, the game switches perspective and becomes Jason Voorhees' Punch-Out! The game certainly isn't perfect, but the spooky music and occasional jump scares are worth a look. Not to mention the cruelest game over screen ever. Next up is Uninvited, a haunted house adventure game. This is part of the Mac Venture series of point-and-click adventure games from Kimco, which started off on Mac and PC before being ported over to the NES in 1991. These are some of my favorite games on the original Nintendo, and I had them all as a kid growing up. In Uninvited, you wake up after a car crash to find that your sister has disappeared. You go off searching for her in this nearby old mansion, and not everything is as it seems. These games give you a first-person perspective, and there's an inventory system as well as a series of commands on the bottom that you can use to interact with the environment and pick up objects. Death lurks around every corner in the form of zombies, hellhounds, demons, monsters, ghosts, and more. The most famous of which is this creepy Scarlett O'Hara ghost that the player encounters fairly early in the game. Hope you have your trusty bottle of No Ghost handy. And it's not just the imagery, some of the descriptions are downright horrifying. She turns to face you. Her face is devoid of any flesh. You are frozen with horror as she begins ripping you apart. This game also has all sorts of red herrings and traps. For example, it's tempting to want to pick up every object in case you need it for something later, but the overwhelming majority of objects you find do nothing, and one object will actually cause you to die if you hold it for too long. And I don't want to spoil too much of the story, but it's heavily implied at the end when you finally find your sister that she was being possessed by a demon that lives in the house. I really can't believe they got away with that. Monster Party, released in 1989 by Bandai. You're a little kid named Mark who sees a falling star on his way home from a baseball game. It turns out to be this weird gargoyle creature from another planet named Bert. Bert takes you to his home world to fight off the evil monsters, and you both fuse together for some reason. Certain power-ups make you switch back and forth between Mark and the monster as you fight off hordes of creep-tastic monsters. Eyeballs, fishes with people legs, whatever these things are, and the bosses are even weirder. Killer plants, pumpkin heads, and this crazy looking Medusa monster. And then there's this giant spider. Sorry, I'm dead. Check out the art direction here too. At one point the first stage morphs into this terrifying landscape of horrific faces, bloody skulls, and these hands coming up from the ground. This is the stuff that nightmares are made of. Even the stage startup screen is soaked in blood. I'll never look at Gumby the same way again. Next up, Chiller, released by Excitey Games in 1990. This was an unlicensed NES port of an arcade game they produced in 1986. It's a light gun game where you just shoot people in a house. Seriously, that's the entire game. The NES version tries to insert a story about a castle being invaded by ghostly forces, but really you're just shooting people and monsters. Zombies, weird monster heads, ghosts, decapitated heads. There's only 4 rooms and some of them are people just chained up in medieval torture devices. You can either shoot the people or shoot the devices to make something gruesome happen. With all of the gore and violence, it's no wonder this game was unlicensed. The producers of this game are just mean. You can cut this guy's head off, feed this guy to an alligator, and shoot an innocent dog. I don't mind violence in video games, but this just seems pointless. It's not by any means a good game, and I can only recommend checking it out for curiosity's sake and not much else. Another horror movie adaptation, Nightmare on Elm Street, released by LJN in 1990. The film follows the movies and you play one of the high schoolers being terrorized by Freddy Krueger. You have to explore Elm Street looking for Freddy's bones in each of the houses and then burn them in the furnace at the high school. You fight all sorts of creepy enemies along the way, and the game has a unique mechanic in that instead of dying when you lose all of your energy, you fall asleep and slip into a nightmarish version of Elm Street, where the enemies get even scarier. The day-to-night transition is actually well done, and similar to the day-night shift in Simon's Quest. Uh-oh, Freddy's coming. Freddy is horrendous looking and he takes on multiple forms similar to the movies. I really can't believe this came out on an 8-bit system. Last but certainly not least, Sweet Home was released in 1989 by Capcom. This game was so scary it was only released in Japan, although the game did receive a fan translation to English. It can actually be purchased as a reproduction cartridge today. It's based on a Toho horror film of the same name, which also came out the same year. The game also inspired several elements of the Resident Evil franchise that we know today. The story revolves around a small film crew exploring an old mansion. They enter the mansion in search of several famous paintings that were hidden by the artist that lived there with the intention of making a documentary about recovering the paintings. But when the film crew enters the building, a terrifying ghost seals the door behind them and threatens to kill them. Now they have to find a way to escape before the mansion collapses or before the monsters that inhabit the place kill them all. It's no wonder this game didn't get a US release. It's a pretty terrifying concept compared to the usual kid-friendly NES lineup of the 80s. Once inside the mansion, the game consists of top-down exploration with several JRPG elements. You can control all 5 of the characters individually or team them up in groups no bigger than 3. This keeps you on your toes because no combination of the characters is overly balanced. They all have their own special tools or abilities such as a key, a med kit, a vacuum cleaner, a camera, as well as a lighter. They each have special uses as you make your way through the mansion. Along the way you have random monster encounters and they get progressively more horrifying as you go. This game also features permadeath. Typically in an RPG, if a character in your party dies, they can be revived in some way. But in Sweet Home, if one of your characters bites the dust, that's it. They're dead and you just have to find a way to get through the game without them. The whole thing is very foreboding and definitely worth a look if you're into horror games as well as RPGs from that era. Well, that wraps it up for this week. I'd love to hear what scary retro games you played as a kid growing up. Did you play any of the games mentioned here, or were there some others that creeped you out when you were growing up? Let me know in the comments below and be sure to like the video if you enjoyed this. You can also subscribe to check out all of my other retro gaming content, and you can even pick up a t-shirt to show your support for your favorite D-list YouTube channel. Hey, thanks for watching everybody. We'll see you next time on Friday Night Arcade.